1992, Steve Hislop toppled the unstoppable Japanese giants, Honda, Yamaha and Suzuki on a bike no one believed could race. Victory was thrilling and terrifying. Back then, Norton was bankrupt, written off, but in a freezing shed in Leicestershire, a lone engineer had built a bike with a triangular rotary engine, no pistons, no valves, just pure radical innovation. Hislop's triumph should have restored British glory, but instead it shocked the racing world, challenged the Japanese, and ignited one of motorsport's deadliest rivalries. This is the untold story of the Norton Rotary, how it stunned the world and nearly destroyed everything. By 1992, Japanese domination of motorcycle racing wasn't just complete, it was suffocating. Honda spent more on their racing program's catering budget than Norton's entire annual turnover. Yamaha had more engineers working on suspension development than Britain had working on complete motorcycles. Suzuki's wind tunnel facility cost more than every British motorcycle manufacturer combined was worth. The numbers told a story of technological colonization. In the premier 500cc World Championship, Japanese manufacturers held every podium for 5 consecutive seasons. British bikes weren't just losing, they weren't even qualifying for races. This wasn't natural evolution, this was systematic destruction. Japanese manufacturers had weaponized engineering. Where British builders relied on intuition and tradition, the Japanese applied unlimited resources to every component. They had computer-controlled test rigs that could simulate 1 million miles of racing in weeks. They had material science laboratories that British universities couldn't afford. They had budgets that treated motorcycle racing like a military campaign. Norton's situation was beyond desperate. It was pathetic. The company that once dominated the Isle of Man TT hadn't won a senior race since 1961. Their road bikes were retro-styled museum pieces bought by nostalgic baby boomers who remembered when Norton meant something. Their racing efforts consisted of showing up to events with modified street bikes and hoping for miracles. Most industry observers considered Norton a zombie brand, technically alive but functionally irrelevant, kept breathing by investors too sentimental to let British motorcycle racing die completely. But there's something about impossible situations that can drive human beings to attempt the unthinkable. The Japanese had made one crucial mistake. They assumed that superior resources always defeat superior innovation. They were about to learn that desperate engineers working in garden sheds can sometimes achieve what massive corporations with unlimited budgets cannot. The technology that would challenge their dominance wasn't even supposed to work on motorcycles. Most engineers had written it off as interesting failure decades earlier, but in the hands of a man who refused to accept that British engineering was obsolete, it was about to prove that the laws of physics cared nothing for corporate budgets or nationalist pride. Felix Wankel's rotary engine violated every principle that motorcycle engineers held sacred. Where every engine since the dawn of internal combustion used pistons hammering up and down in cylinders, Wankel's design used a triangular rotor that spun smoothly inside an oval chamber. Think about the audacity of this concept. No connecting rods, no crankshafts, no valves, no camshafts, no timing chains. Just a simple triangular piece of metal that rotated in perfect balance, with every face of the triangle acting as a moving piston. The theoretical advantages were so overwhelming they seemed impossible. A rotary engine was smaller, lighter and smoother than any conventional engine producing equivalent power. It fired once per rotation instead of once every 2 rotations. It had perfect mechanical balance instead of violent reciprocating masses trying to tear themselves apart. But theory is where most revolutionary ideas die. The first attempt to prove Wankel's vision came from Germany in 1974. Hercules built the W2000 using a rotary engine designed for snowmobiles. The result was spectacular failure disguised as innovation. A heavy, expensive, underpowered motorcycle that convinced the entire industry that rotary engines were engineering curiosities with no practical application. The problem seemed insurmountable. Rotary engines ran so hot they could literally melt themselves. The spinning seals at the rotor tips wore out faster than tires. The combustion chambers couldn't burn fuel completely, creating terrible economy and emissions. Most fatally, the engines were impossible to tune using conventional methods. Every major manufacturer studied the technology and reached the same conclusion. Interesting concept, hopeless execution. But when the rights to produce rotary engines ended up in British hands after Hercules collapsed, one engineer refused to accept conventional wisdom. David Garside had watched British motorcycle racing die a slow death as Japanese manufacturers systematically outspent and out-engineered every European rival. He understood that playing by the established rules meant guaranteed defeat. If British engineering was going to survive, it needed to rewrite the rules entirely. Garside's breakthrough came from understanding that the Rotary's biggest weakness could become its greatest strength. The excessive heat that destroyed other designs could be harnessed as part of the engine's cooling and breathing system. His solution was elegantly simple. Channel incoming air through the interior of the spinning rotor to extract heat, then collect that hot air in a large chamber where it could cool before mixing with fuel. This turned the engine's heat production into part of its performance advantage. By 1984, Norton had built the Interpol 2, a rotary-powered police motorcycle that proved the concept wasn't just theoretical. The 588cc twin-rotor engine produced 85 horsepower with smoothness that conventional engines couldn't match. The Interpol 2 also revealed the technology's fatal flaw. It only worked when moving fast enough to force air through the cooling system. At low speeds, the engine would overheat and self-destruct. For a police motorcycle, that was disqualifying. For a racing motorcycle that would spend its life at maximum speed, it might be perfect. The question was whether anyone would be crazy enough to risk their life to find out. The answer came from a man whose obsession with rotary engines would nearly get him killed and changed motorcycle racing forever. Brian Crichton's workshop was a disgrace to professional engineering. Located in a converted garden shed behind his house, it had no proper ventilation, inadequate lighting, and tools that belonged in a museum. Honda's racing team had better facilities in their truck's tool compartments, but Crichton had something Honda's engineers lacked: the desperation that drives breakthrough innovation. As Norton's service engineer, Crichton spent his days fixing the constant failures that plagued the Interpol 2 police bikes. Overheated engines, worn rotor seals, fouled spark plugs. Every breakdown taught him something about the Rotary's potential and limitations. While other engineers saw problems, Crichton saw possibilities. The Rotary's failures weren't fundamental design flaws, they were tuning issues that no one had properly solved. The overheating could be managed with better cooling systems. The seal wear could be reduced with improved materials. More importantly, the power output could be dramatically increased if someone was willing to push the technology beyond conservative police bike specifications. When Crichton proposed building a racing version, Norton's management dismissed him immediately. They were struggling to make a police bike reliable enough for real-world use. The idea of a high-performance racing version seemed like engineering fantasy, but Crichton had the kind of observation that ignores logic and corporate authority. Working nights and weekends from his inadequate shed, he began the systematic process of extracting racing performance from Rotary technology. His testbed was an engine salvaged from a crashed police bike, essentially garbage that he transformed into a research platform. The breakthrough came from understanding that Rotary engines couldn't be tuned like conventional piston engines. You couldn't install different camshafts or pistons to increase power. Instead, the Rotary required modifications to the intake and exhaust ports in the rotor housing, essentially reshaping the combustion chambers to optimize airflow and flame propagation. Working with techniques borrowed from two-stroke development, Crichton gradually coaxed more power from the 580cc engine. By 1987, his cobbled-together prototype was producing 120 horsepower, nearly 50% more than the police specification. The real test came when he loaded his creation onto a trailer and drove to a test track. What happened next was so shocking that it forced Norton's management to completely reconsider their position on racing development. 170 miles per hour from a 580cc engine built in a shed by one man working alone. Norton's executives realized they may be witnessing something extraordinary. If Crichton could achieve those results with virtually no resources, the potential for proper development seemed limitless. But they were about to learn that building revolutionary engines was the easy part. The real challenge would be keeping riders alive while they unleashed that power on racetracks designed for conventional motorcycles. Revolution demands sacrifice, and the Rotary engine was about to extract a terrifying price from anyone brave enough to race it. The first Norton RC588 was less a motorcycle than a barely controlled explosion on wheels. Crichton had solved the engine problem brilliantly. The Rotary produced massive power with silky smoothness that made conventional engines sound like agricultural equipment. But he'd wrapped that revolutionary power plant in a conventional steel chassis that flexed like a wet noodle under the engine's relentless thrust. The result was a machine that actively tried to kill its rider. At racing speeds, the chassis would twist and flex unpredictably, making the bike impossible to control precisely. The harder you pushed it, the more dangerous it became. Riders described the experience as wrestling with something that had its own malevolent agenda. Crichton quickly realized that revolutionary engines demanded revolutionary chassis technology. He commissioned Spandon Engineering to build a rigid aluminum twin-spar frame designed specifically for the Rotary's unique characteristics. The transformation was immediate and dramatic. With proper chassis rigidity, the RC588 became not just powerful, but manageable. In its racing debut in late 1987, it won its second race, announcing to the British racing establishment that something fundamental had changed. The next evolution, the RCW 588 introduced in 1989, featured liquid cooling that boosted power to over 135 horsepower, enough to challenge much larger Japanese bikes on equal terms. But the real innovation came when John Player Special agreed to sponsor the program. The tobacco company's black and gold livery had made Formula One history. When those same colors appeared on a Norton motorcycle, it sent an unmistakable message to the racing world. This wasn't just another struggling British manufacturer, this was a serious challenge to Japanese dominance. The 1989 season became Norton's moment of glory. Steve Spray dominated British racing circuits with a ferocity that shocked established manufacturers. He won both the Formula One and 750cc Super Cup championships, breaking lap records at circuit after circuit, proving that the Rotary wasn't just fast, it was devastatingly superior to conventional technology when properly developed. Norton celebrated by launching the F1 road bike, a street-legal replica that allowed enthusiasts to experience Rotary power for themselves. Only 140 were ever built, making it one of the most exclusive motorcycles ever produced. But success created new problems. Norton's management decided they needed professional leadership to take the program to the next level. They brought in Barry Simmons, a former Honda racing manager, to professionalize their operations. For Crichton, this felt like betrayal. He had built the Rotary program from nothing, solving problems that established manufacturers had dismissed as impossible. Now corporate consultants were being hired to fix his creation. The conflict exploded over tire selection. Simmons decided to switch from Dunlop to Michelin compounds, a change that invalidated years of chassis development work optimized for Dunlop characteristics. Crichton saw his life's work being destroyed by management consultants who understood corporate processes but not Rotary engine development. In September 1990, he resigned from Norton and founded his own team, Roton. The split that should have strengthened Norton's program instead crippled it. The factory team never recaptured the magic of 1989 without Crichton's engineering genius. His private team produced brilliant motorcycles but lacked resources for sustained competition. The revolution was fragmenting just as it reached its critical moment. But fate had one more chapter to write in the Rotary story. A race so intense and dramatic that it would become the stuff of legend while simultaneously sealing the technology's doom. Sometimes the greatest victories are also death sentences. Steve Hislop was Scotland's fastest rider without a motorcycle. The supremely talented Scotsman had been dropped by his Yamaha team just weeks before the 1992 Isle of Man TT, leaving him desperate for any competitive ride. Norton's NRS 588 was a thoroughbred without a jockey. The latest evolution of Rotary technology featured 135 horsepower, a sophisticated Harris aluminum chassis, and engineering that represented the pinnacle of British innovation. But it needed a rider capable of extracting its potential on the world's most dangerous racecourse. The partnership was born of mutual desperation rather than careful planning. What resulted was one of the most intense battles in racing history. The 1992 Senior TT should have been a mismatch. Carl Fogarty's factory Yamaha represented everything Japanese manufacturers had learned about building perfect racing motorcycles: unlimited development budget, factory support, sophisticated electronics, and a rider who knew every inch of the 37.73-mile mountain course. The Norton looked pathetic by comparison. Painted in an unfamiliar white instead of the iconic JPS colors, it represented a tiny British team with a fraction of Yamaha's resources, running technology that most engineers considered obsolete. But the Isle of Man TT has never cared about logic or corporate budgets. From the opening miles, spectators knew they were witnessing something extraordinary. Both riders were pushing far beyond their normal TT pace, setting sector times that approached the absolute limit of human capability on public roads lined with stone walls and telegraph poles. The battle developed with surgical precision. Lap 1, Fogarty led by 2.4 seconds at Ramsey Hairpin, his Yamaha's superior handling advantage showing through the technical mountain sections. But Hislop was clawing back time on every straight as the Rotary seamless power delivery pulled him past braking markers no conventional engine could reach. Lap 2, the gap had shrunk to 1.8 seconds at Cronk Nimona. Radio commentators were struggling to find words for the intensity unfolding on the mountain. Both riders were operating in a realm beyond normal human experience, pushing themselves and their machines into territory where milliseconds separated glory from death. Lap 3, Hislop took the lead by 0.6 seconds at Balliol Bridge. The crowd could hear the difference. Where Fogarty's Yamaha screamed with mechanical fury, the Norton sang with an otherworldly smoothness that seemed to defy the laws of internal combustion. Lap 4, Fogarty fought back with desperate aggression, regaining the lead by 1.2 seconds at the bungalow. Every technical section belonged to Yamaha's precise handling, every straight to Norton's revolutionary engine. Neither rider was giving an inch. Lap 5, with victory hanging in the balance, the gap fluctuated corner by corner. At Glen Helen, Hislop led by half a second. By Governor's Bridge, Fogarty was ahead by the same margin. 20 years of racing experience meant nothing. Both riders were riding beyond the edge of known possibility. On the final lap, Fogarty threw everything into one last desperate assault. His final lap of 121.28 miles per hour represented the absolute limit of what was physically possible on the mountain course, a speed that should have been unbeatable. But when the checkered flag fell, Hislop had won by 4.4 seconds. The victory silenced the racing world. A bankrupt British manufacturer with radical technology had defeated the might of Japanese factory development on motorcycling's most prestigious stage. Hislop climbed off his Norton, and his hands were shaking. He later described the race as the most terrifying experience of his life. 6 laps of wrestling with a machine that felt like it was trying to kill him while simultaneously pulling him to speeds no human should survive. The racing world celebrated what seemed like a triumph for innovation over corporate domination, but they were witnessing something else entirely. The last victory the Rotary engine would ever achieve. The very success that proved its brilliance had just signed its death warrant. Within hours of Hislop's victory, the whisper campaigns began. Japanese manufacturer executives who had watched their supposedly superior technology get humiliated by a British shed-built engine weren't interested in sporting congratulations. They were interested in making sure it never happened again. The attack came on multiple fronts, each designed to appear reasonable while systematically destroying Rotary racing. First was the equivalency question. How do you fairly compare a 588cc Rotary to a 750cc or 1000cc piston engine? The racing world had never solved this fundamental problem, relying instead on arbitrary formulas that satisfied no one. Suddenly, these formulas became urgent matters requiring immediate attention. Safety provided the perfect public justification. The Rotary did run dangerously hot, and exhaust temperatures reached 1200 degrees Celsius, creating genuine fire risks. The engine's lubrication system sprayed unburned oil from the exhaust, which could ignite when combined with those extreme temperatures. Racing marshals who had ignored far more dangerous situations for decades suddenly became deeply concerned about rotor safety. But the real pressure was financial. Japanese manufacturers had invested hundreds of millions in developing conventional 4-stroke technology. They weren't about to let their investment be rendered obsolete by a British engineer working in a garden shed. The political machinery of international racing began grinding towards its inevitable conclusion. Brian Crichton's private team inadvertently accelerated their own destruction with one final, brilliant triumph. After Norton's factory program collapsed in 1993, Crichton continued developing Rotary technology independently. In 1994, with Ian Simpson riding and Duckham's Oil providing modest sponsorship, his tiny team achieved the impossible. They won the British Superbike Championship. Simpson defeated factory teams from Ducati and Kawasaki, manufacturers who had spent millions on conventional development, using a motorcycle built in what was essentially an advanced shed. The victory was a masterpiece of engineering over resources, proving that brilliant innovation could still embarrass corporate might. It was also the final nail in the Rotary's coffin. The sight of Ian Simpson celebrating with the championship trophy while Ducati and Kawasaki engineers stood empty-handed was more than the racing establishment could tolerate. If a shed-built British engine could defeat the best conventional technology from Europe and Japan, what did that say about the millions being spent on factory development programs? After the 1994 season, the FIM moved with surgical precision. New technical regulations were introduced that effectively banned Rotary engines from major competition. The official justification cited safety concerns and competitive equity. The unofficial reality was that revolutionary technology had been assassinated by bureaucrats who found its success inconvenient. The Rotary engine hadn't been defeated on the racetrack. It had been murdered in committee rooms by officials who understood that sometimes the greatest threat to established order isn't inferior competition, it's superior innovation. The Norton Rotary represents the greatest what-if in motorcycle history. We'll never know how far the technology could have advanced if it hadn't been killed at the moment of its greatest triumph. We'll never see the battles that might have developed between rotary-powered Nortons and conventional superbikes as both technologies pushed each other towards perfection. The Rotary's assassination revealed uncomfortable truths about modern motorsport that no one wanted to acknowledge. Technical regulations aren't just about safety and fairness, they're about protecting massive corporate investments from disruptive innovation that could render them worthless overnight. The Japanese manufacturers who complained about Rotary unfairness had themselves used superior resources to systematically destroy European competition for 2 decades. But when facing technology that could challenge their dominance, they suddenly became passionate advocates for regulatory intervention. The Rotary's influence on modern motorcycles is almost invisible, but it's there. The smooth power delivery that modern bikes achieve through sophisticated electronics was inherent in the Rotary's mechanical design. The compact package that allows current superbikes to house massive engines and tight chassis was pioneered by Wankel's triangular rotor concept. Most importantly, the Norton Rotary proved that breakthrough innovation doesn't require massive budgets or corporate backing. It requires obsession, brilliance, and the willingness to ignore conventional wisdom when it stands in the way of revolutionary thinking. But it also proved that in modern motorsport, being right isn't enough. Being superior isn't enough. Sometimes, even demonstrating that you're better on the racetrack isn't enough if your success threatens the wrong people. Here's the question that should keep you awake at night. If a man working in a garden shed could build technology superior to what massive corporations achieved with unlimited budgets, what other innovations are being suppressed because they threaten the wrong interests? Do you think the FIM made the right decision to ban rotary engines for safety reasons? Or did they commit one of the greatest acts of technological assassination in racing history? Let us hear what you think in the comments section, and if you want to see more videos like this, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.